Hello, everyone. We are joined by a very special guest today, Wayne Termel. Wayne is the co-founder of Remote Leadership Institute. He has been writing about how to develop communication and leadership skills for almost 20 years now. He has taught and consulted at both Fortune 500 companies and startups all around the world. For the last 8 years, focusing on the growing need to communicate effectively in remote and virtual environments. Marshall Goldsmith has called Wayne one of the truly unique voices in leadership. And we're so glad to have that voice with us today. Hi, Wayne. We're so excited to have you with us.
Hi, Priya. It's lovely to be here. After that build-up, I'd better be good, huh?
Okay. So the topic for discussion today is communication in COVID times. And Wayne, with all that is going around in the world today, with COVID-19 forcing the entire workforce to operate from home, the dynamics of communication has completely changed, right? So what would be your advice to the team leaders and managers to communicate effectively during this time?
Yeah, I think we need to re-examine that statement you just made, that the dynamics of communication have completely changed. In some ways, obviously, they have, but in other ways, they haven't. I mean, we still communicate the same way we always have. We send a message, we hope the message was heard and interpreted, and then we hope people take action on it. That hasn't changed. We still need to make sure that we understand each other. We need to make sure the communication is two-way. What has changed is that we're using different tools perhaps than we did before, and the ratio of which tools we use to communicate have changed. The mindset is the same as it's always been. The outcome is the same as it's always been. It's that middle piece. How do we do it? That we need to be much more mindful of, that we're doing it mediated and mitigated by technology, and we need to be very mindful of how we communicate. So I think, as we said in Long Distance Leader, the first rule is think what you need to do as a leader or as a team, and then give some thought to how you're going to do it.
Okay. Do you think remote communication has distorted the normal pace of our conversations, or has it kind of made it more human?
Well, it's absolutely changed, and it depends how we communicate. I mean, the changes began a long time ago. Genghis Khan ruled half the world and never held a WebEx account. So it can in fact be done if you're careful about it. But technology has changed in a number of ways, some obvious, some not. The fact that we're literally half a world apart having this conversation, and I can see who you're dealing with, and you can, for good or evil, see me. That's important to forming communication, right? We work better with people we know, like, and trust. And one of the first steps towards trusting somebody is putting a face to a name. So things like Zoom and the various webcam based tools have obviously changed things. And whereas before Corona, it's kind of BC and AC, right? Before Corona, there was still some resistance to using webcams. People found all kinds of excuses not to do it. And suddenly that was no longer an option, and we found ourselves doing it. So certainly webcams, for an example, have gone a long way to making remote communication and remote work easier.
Right.
And there's a bad side to that, and we can talk about that too. But there are also things that started to change years ago. When I first started in the workplace, which should tell you how long ago that was, email wasn't a thing. I mean, one of my first big projects was instituting email in my company.
Wow.
In the company that I worked for. Yeah, see, you just went, and then a dinosaur walked by, and we hit them with a club. But that's a fact. And it's fundamentally changed the way we operate. Over 70% of workplace communication now takes place in writing.
Yeah.
Text, email, instant message, Slack, whatever it is. Well, think about understand our message, make sure it was received, make sure it was interpreted. With email, that's a one-way tool.
Right.
You don't know whether, well, you know your message was sent. You don't know if it was received, and you certainly don't know how it was interpreted. So the majority of our workplace communication is happening in a way that doesn't work real well for high stakes communication. So we need to adjust. We need to make sure that email's a great tool for certain things. Are we using it for the right reasons? Are we using Slack in the way that it was intended to be done? Are we getting on the webcam and talking to each other when that is the right way to communicate this message? We need to be mindful and not just default to whatever communication is easiest or is our preference.
Correct. Yeah. So, you mentioned a lot about technology, and which is pretty true also. We can talk while we're sitting in different parts of the world, and it's made communication easier. But, I think a lot of talk that we're having these days is around, something called Zoom fatigue. So how should we know that, how much is too much when we're talking in
Right.
remote setup?
The fact is, people have never found a technology that they weren't able to spoil. Right? As soon as somebody invented fire, somebody used it to burn down their neighbor's house. I mean, we've never been allowed to have nice things as a species. And every communication tool that we've developed has had unintended consequences. Like I say, I remember when email was going to solve the problems of the world. You could get an instant reaction to information. You didn't have to fax it. You didn't have to wait a week for the post office to deliver the letter and somebody send their message back.
Yeah.
It was going to be a beautiful thing. And it didn't take long for us to abuse it and have it overwhelm us. And to the point where, email is both our biggest productivity tool and our biggest productivity barrier.
Right.
So when we think about Zoom fatigue, hey, we've got this tool and we can see each other and that's great. And then there are a lot of people who are really needy and don't like working in a vacuum. And so they want to be on camera all the time, and every meeting needs to be on camera. But in fact, our brains process webcam and video information differently than it does when we're sitting in the same place. Zoom fatigue is real. Sitting, staring at a screen, trying to look at 12 different faces and try not to look like you're not paying attention, right? So being super vigilant about what people see is literally exhausting. Having a conversation, leading a class, presenting a webinar is not like being in the room with other people. There is an energy interchange that happens when we are live and our little endorphins go off and we laugh at each other's jokes, and it's different. It's physically draining to be on camera all the time. So what's happened is we've got this tool, and like we do with every tool humans have ever invented, the pendulum has swung way over here so that we're using it perhaps more or not in the optimum way.
Right.
And we act sometimes like it's a binary choice, right? We either use webcams for every single thing all of the time, or we don't use them at all. And it's like, that's a bad answer. It's like, oh, we're going to do away with email in our company. Well, then you're probably an idiot, because it has a role.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're going to replace it, it better be with something that does the same job.
Definitely.
So we need to be very mindful about when is the right time to use one tool, when is the right time to do another. I'm a big believer that if you've got 20 people on a meeting, you do not need 20 webcams. First of all, if you've got 20 people on a meeting, you need to examine why you have 20 people.
Correct.
On that meeting, right? That's the first thing. So it's, again, it goes back to making good choices. Why are we doing what we're doing? Certainly the active speaker should be visible to the audience. You don't need 20 little tiny webcams across the screen, so you can use the tool, but use it in speaker view, for example, which is less contributing to Zoom fatigue. Not everything needs to be on webcam. Now, I am a big fan of webcam for these one-on-one conversations like you and I are having. And you know, obviously, at your company, those one-on-one conversations are so critical. And that's a time when, yeah, I think if I'm going to have a coaching conversation with you, we need to make that as rich an experience as possible. Now, does it need to be an hour? Can we do 2 30-minute meetings with a break in between so you can do other stuff? Shorter, more frequent communication seems to work better in a lot of remote circumstances. Long meetings where everybody goes through everything tend to be very draining and soul-killing. And some people need more communication than others. Some people want to be left alone. Some people want to be left alone but shouldn't be. And other people desperately need human contact. And, oh, you know, Wayne is really good at his job, so I'm only going to check in with him once a week. May not work because Wayne is a needy person who wants that communication. I'll give you a really quick example, Priya, and then I'll shut up. My boss and co-author, Kevin Eikenberry, is in Indianapolis. I'm in Las Vegas. We're on different time zones, you know, all the typical challenges. Every morning when I get up, the first thing I do is I send him a Slack message and I say, good morning, is there anything I need to know? And most days the message is, good morning, nope, carry on.
Okay.
But I've been connected. I feel like I know what's going on. Now, there are some mornings where it's, hey, we need to talk about this. Fine. But for me, I need that short, frequent communication to make sure that I'm not alone in the wilderness, to make sure that what I'm working on is what I should be working on. Because left to my own devices, I don't always prioritize my work as well as I should.
Right.
So for Kevin and I, that works great. He has people on his team that he never talks to. Now, that's an exaggeration, but he doesn't talk to them nearly as often. But when he does, it's like an hour in-depth, heavy-duty conversation.
Right. So are you saying that it should be left on the employees, the team members?
Well, I'm saying they're part of the discussion.
Yeah.
You know, if the company says, this is the policy, and I'm going to talk to you this often, that may work on average, but we all have our own individual work style. We all have our own individual communication style. We all have different needs. And if you do this is how we're going to communicate, and you just mandate it, and you say, this is it, and you don't consult the person being impacted by that,
right,
you're potentially creating unnecessary problems. One of the prime examples is that managers tend to spend all their time with their problem children. Right? Wayne obviously can't be trusted, so I'm going to spend a lot of time working with him. And somebody else, you know, Priya is my top performer, so I'm only going to talk to her once a week or once every couple of weeks when we need it because she's fine. Well, Priya may be sitting there going, excuse me, when do I get some help? When do I get some attention? When do I get some coaching? And so if we don't take the coachee into account when we're setting up our policies and procedures, we're probably laying some landmines that we will definitely step on later.
Right. Right. So do you think a one-on-one meeting between a manager and an employee should be enough? obviously it's very important to have these one-on-one, I mean, first, I think let's start with that. I want to hear your thoughts on this. How important do you think are one-on-one meetings between managers and?
Well, one-on-ones are critical, right? They just are. And it didn't matter whether you were building the pyramids or building software. The one-on-one communication is critical because not everybody is willing to share things in a team meeting. Not everybody is willing to be forthcoming with their questions without that conversation. If I don't know who you are, I'm less likely to trust you.
Right.
So the one-on-one conversations are critical. And it's like everything else. And this drives me crazy about technology people. They have a tool and they assume that their tool will solve everything. And there is no tool that is 100% right for every situation. You need a spectrum of communication tools in your toolkit, ranging from getting in the car, driving together, sitting in a coffee shop, having a face-to-face conversation, to the blanket email. They all have their uses if we are intentional about what is the purpose of this communication. How important is it that I know that it was received and that they got it and that they've interpreted it correctly? So we need a mix of one-way and two-way means of communication.
Right.
So to say one-on-ones are enough, well, no, sometimes you got to talk as a team. And you have to make sure that the team is talking to each other and not just to the manager.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stress and anxiety, you know, around with all this COVID situation that's happening around the world, and we all are, you know, victims to that. So how can teams communicate better among themselves? Of course, technology is one way. Obviously, technology is possibly the only thing that's, you know, kind of facilitating these conversations these days. But do you think some kind of virtual, you know, virtual meetups, happy hours, those kind of things are going to help, or they should devise their own?
I think if what you're trying to form is a true team. Remember, there are different structures for teams, right? If I'm a sales manager, I might have 5 salespeople, but they don't interact with each other very much. And so they're just 5 people who report to the same manager. To my mind, that's not a team. That's a bunch of people who report to the same manager. A team collaborates with each other, and the sum is greater than the individual parts. And that conversation, particularly in a virtual world, needs to be consciously facilitated and allowed to happen. So things like, and some of them are things like virtual happy hours and having the whole team get together and taking time to update each other, not just on what's our work, but how's our family doing? And,
Right.
you know, how are you holding up through all of
personal
this?
touch there, right?
A little bit of the personal touch is really quite important. I think that one of the most important thing managers can do, seems counterintuitive, is if Priya comes to me with a question, you know, Priya, you really ought to go talk to Bob. Because one of the things that happens, and it's perfectly natural, is because we can have these one-on-ones and, you know, you're feeling isolated and you know that a strong relationship with your manager is important, your default is to come to the manager. Right. Rather than perhaps to your teammates. And that does a couple of things. First of all, it disintegrates the relationship with the other people in your circle, and it overburdens your manager. Your manager undoubtedly is finding themselves right now fielding more questions, answering more emails, dealing with more stuff than they ever did before.
That's correct. Yeah.
And if the manager isn't conscious of that dynamic and says, ooh, I need the team talking to each other, and it's real easy to take that all on themselves.
Right. Okay. So another thing, you know, so I mean, we've talked a lot about over communication and all. I know you've mentioned that, but is there a thing as over communication when we're working remotely? Is that is that true?
If the manager decides how much they're going to communicate,
Hmm.
and they're not listening to the consumers of that information, right? Is a every morning 10-minute huddle meeting a good idea in general? Are there people who are finding that an interruption to their business, or because of time zones, it makes it harder to do? It's in the middle of one person's day while it's the beginning of somebody else's. The team probably has a vote in that, right? If the manager, and is so often the case, particularly in tech, if the manager was a great individual contributor and their preference is to be left alone to do the work, and their assumption is that that's everybody else's preference too,
Right.
right? They're going to communicate in a style that works best for them.
Right.
So, when you're setting up a communication plan, and unfortunately, we didn't really have a chance to do this before COVID. It was like all of a sudden we woke up one morning and went, okay, everybody's working at home. So a lot of us are trying to fix the boat while it's in the water.
Yeah.
But the plan is really talk to people about what do they need. What are you trying to accomplish as the manager? What do you need from them? What do they need from you? Create a plan, work the plan for a bit, and then be prepared to rework it. Hey, when we started working from home, the 10-minute every morning webcam huddle meetings were really great. They don't add so much value anymore because people are up and running and they're doing their thing and their schedules are different. Okay, maybe we need to re-examine that.
Right.
Right? Maybe we started a plan that says everybody needs to be on their webcam every time they have a conversation with a teammate. And somebody says, I'm in the car. This is going to be a 2-minute conversation. Pick up the phone.
Right.
And I know there's an entire generation of people unfamiliar with the fact that you can talk on the phone, but it is in fact possible. It's another tool in your toolkit.
Correct.
So that's the thing, is have conversations with the stakeholders and the people involved. What is it we're trying to achieve? What tools do we have at our disposal that allow us to do that? And which tools do we use when? And what are the rules of engagement? And then give it a shot and see what happens. And almost inevitably, there will need to be adjustments to the plan.
Right. Right.
And some of that will be based on individual preference. Hey, I need to talk to Priya 3 times a week. I can talk to Wayne once a week. Okay.
Yeah.
The trap that managers fall into, especially when we work remotely, is we want to treat everyone the same. And what we're really aiming for is treating everyone equally. So to generate the same level of trust, the same level of information, the same level of confidence, some people need a lot of communication, some people need less. Some people need face-to-face in person, some people just need a way to track it using some kind of report. It's going to take time to learn. And ironically, just as we are about to start going back to work for a lot of people, we're starting to figure out how this works.
Right. So, you said something very interesting there, that the plan we need to improvise it. We need to keep checking with our, teammates. The managers need to keep taking that call, and they need to keep be adaptable to the situation, of course. So a little bit about asynchronous communication here. How can they the managers maybe use that to their, because I think before COVID, like you said, BC and AC. So before COVID, I don't think a lot of this asynchronous communication was really a thing, right? But now that a lot of people are working remote, it's come into a lot of communication and people are discussing that. So
it's like everything else, right? There are reasons for synchronous communication and asynchronous communication. If your manager's default position is everybody's in the office at the same time, the default, because this is the human default, is to synchronous communication, which is where Zoom fatigue comes from,
yeah.
right? We've all seen that meme that says, you know, I survived another meeting that could have been an email. Well, why are we having meetings instead of emails? There's lots of reasons, not the least of which is nobody read the email. Right? The manager sent out the email, asked them to take action, and nothing happened. Guess what happens, workers, when you don't respond to a polite asynchronous request? You get sucked into a meeting. But when we're talking about time zones, when we're talking about conversations that don't necessarily require a full-blown meeting, specific groups in Microsoft Teams or Slack, question and answer forums, the ability to have discussion groups about discrete topics, allow people wherever they are and whatever their time zone is to add value to the conversation, get the information they need, truly act as a team.
Right.
So asynchronous communication is critical. But again, it's a balance. If you've ever been in that Slack group or that email thread that never seems to reach a conclusion, what started as an asynchronous communication perhaps needs some synchronous communication to put an end to the foolishness. So to say, oh, one tool or another is the be all and end all doesn't work. There's a reason Slack has Zoom integrated into it.
That's correct.
Right? Because we're chatting back and forth, we're chatting back and forth. Finally, somebody says, this is nonsense. Join meeting, you talk about it, and it's over. That's the way to use tools.
Right.
But not everybody's empowered to do that. A lot of teams still believe it's the manager's job to call a meeting. It's the manager's job to say, hey, this email thread isn't working, let's make a decision.
Right. So,
and in a perfect world, it's not.
That's correct. So what would be, what would be your top 3 tips for managers, if you had to if you had to just say A, B, C.
You mean if we were going to mercifully put this conversation to an end? Is that what you're asking me? Okay. There's 3 things. The first thing is, as a leader, as a communicator, understand what is it you're trying to achieve, and then apply the right tool to that particular message or task. Be mindful of what we're using. So that's the first thing. And I say that because as managers, we all know I should have a conversation with Priya, but it's not going to be pleasant. So I'm just sending an email. Right? I know what the right thing to do is. I also know I don't want to deal with her right now. And so I'm going to take the easy way out.
Yeah.
We have to choose the right tool for the right job. The second thing, I think, is we need to get good at using the tools. If you look at any software platform, 80% of people use 20% of the features. Well, if we've got a job that's really hard to do, and we're forced to use tools which don't lend themselves naturally to doing that job, and oh, by the way, we don't use most of the tools, we've made it very difficult on ourselves. The other thing is that the number one factor in whether a team adopts a technology as part of their workflow is, does the boss use it? So if you're resisting using SharePoint, or you're still attaching documents to emails instead of using the shared drive, why are you shocked that people aren't using the shared drive?
Right.
And the third thing, I think, is, at least at the beginning, err on the side of two-way communication. Remember that communication is message sent, message received, message interpreted.
Right.
If you're only communicating one way, you know the message was sent. You can get a little notification that says, yes, Priya got the email. Doesn't give you any clues if she read it. Doesn't give you any clues if she understood it. Didn't give you any clue as to whether she has questions or she's going to take action or she's annoyed or whatever. So an email by itself is very often not communication, it's data transfer. So are you using the right tool for the right job? Are you using the tools well?
Right.
And are you conscious of not just sending the message, but how is it being received and interpreted?
Okay, so one last question here. The last thing that you said, that it's also about how the receiver has interpreted the message. So it's a very important question for managers, I think, to understand that how has this message been received well? Have I communicated effectively? Are there any kind of pointers or something that they can, know that this has been an effective communication? Does it depend on the results? Does it depend on the response?
Well, I think that, some of this is built on trust and experience, right? If I've been working with somebody for a long time, I've got a pretty good idea how they're going to respond. But a lot of times, especially when we work remotely, managers send out a message, go, okay, I sent that message, check. They're not following up to ensure understanding. They might say things like, you have any questions, let me know.
Yeah.
Do people really feel comfortable coming to you with those questions? Or do they try to work through it themselves under bad assumptions? Or do they start gossiping and carrying on amongst themselves, right? We need to build the feedback mechanism into the way we cooperate. If we send out a message and want to know whether it's been interpreted, on our next one-on-one, we should probably talk about that message.
Right.
So that things don't happen in a vacuum. It's not like a message is sent once and received. Marketers will tell you it takes 10 times for a message to stick in a customer's brain. Why are we surprised that because I sent an email on Tuesday about this thing that's happening next week, everybody remembers and knows that it's happening?
Yeah. So do you think some kind of reminders would help there? Or?
Of course, reminders help. Build it into the shared calendars. When you're having your one-on-ones, you should be keeping a list of everything I need to talk to Priya about. And don't let me forget to ask about that. And vice versa, right? You say, oh, you sent this email last week. I have a couple of questions. Are you forthcoming and being proactive in your questions to me? And that goes to the nature of the relationship. Do we have the kind of relationship where you trust you can ask those questions and not look like a dummy? Or that I'm going to treat you as inferior because you obviously didn't understand my brilliantly crafted message?
Right. So I think that's very important thing you said there, and I think a lot of managers and leaders are going to benefit from this conversation that we had today around communication, because communication is key for every relationship. And I think for, a manager and employee relationship to foster, it's very, very important. And if these managers are to find you or to get in touch with you, where should they look up?
They can find me any number of ways. The internet is a very small place in some ways. Certainly, you can find me on LinkedIn, Wayne Termel. Our website is the Remote Leadership Institute, remoteleadershipinstitute.com. Wayne at Remote Leadership Institute. There's no shortage of ways to find me, Priya, if people are looking for me.
I'm sure people already know a lot about you. Which is
Yeah,
just
well, half my life is overcoming that, but that's a totally different set of problems.
all right, Wayne. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Priya. It's a delight talking to you too.
Thank you.